Hello. How are you today? I hope this finds you doing well. I'm James Henry, and I want to begin by reminding you that you are infinitely precious and unconditionally loved for the gift you already are. That is an intrinsic part of your story, your preciousness, your being loved, and the fact that you're a gift. It's woven into the tapestry of your life. Today, I want to talk a little bit about stories, the stories we curate about ourselves, about our faith, about the world in which we live, because those short stories tend to be the way we see the world in which we live, the way we respond to the world. And periodically, I think it's important for us to curate carefully the stories that we are presenting to ourselves and to the world around us. Stories matter in part because we are a people of stories. We gain our meaning from those stories, the stories that we learn from childhood about our value, about where we come from, about where we're going to, about our purpose in this world, the meaning of our lives. Those are all stories that we curate, that we present to ourselves and to the world. And oftentimes, or at least sometimes, the stories we curate about ourselves begin to shape our own identity, our understanding of ourselves. And if those stories tell what we perceive to be negative things about us, we begin to see ourselves in a negative way. And we're so much more than that. It's interesting to me, recently I came across one of the earliest articulations of my sense of calling to ministry. This was way back in my life when I was about, I would say I was maybe 19 years old. Now that articulation included an earlier realization in my life, but the way I articulated it was from the place of my 19-year-old self. When people ask me about my calling now, or even in the last several years, the way I articulate it is different. It's not necessarily that the facts of the story changed so much as the way I perceive those facts and the events that led to my sense of calling have changed. As I've grown, as I've learned more about myself and the world in which I live, as I've come to see that world through different eyes, through eyes I'd like to believe are growing in faith, in love, in hope, in kindness and gentleness, as my eyes perceive the world in that larger way, and I see myself in that larger way, the stories that I articulate change. So that if I were to sense that I were called now, and I do, and were to begin the process of discernment about whether or not my calling is the United Methodist Ministry, the way I'd articulate that or write that short story would look different now than it did for my 19-year-old self. It's not that it's not that it would be better now. It would be different now. And the stories we tell and the way we tell them are often shaped by the place we find ourselves in our lives. And if you've ever thought about it, stories themselves can be very, very disarming. They can also be very, very anxiety driven. They can be driven by all sorts of feelings that rise up in us, but they can be disarming. I find that one of the most interesting things that happens in my life, and part of my work as a pastor, is curating stories, my own, helping other people see their own stories, as well as the sacred stories that come to us in the sacred writings. That when I want to know something more about a person, I ask them to tell me not just what they think, although I do ask that. I ask them to tell me the story of how they came to think what they think now. And as they tell the story, all of my little, defensive mechanisms that I might erect, if you just told me that you were right and I was wrong, or if I told you that I was right and you were wrong, that the stories begin to catch nuances of how a person might think the way they think, how they became the person they became, how they came to see the world with the eyes that they see the world. And understanding those stories, hearing those stories, and beginning to get a glimpse of the person behind the story is very disarming. My hands don't immediately come up and say, no, 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 you're wrong. They are, because the person is merely narrating a bit of how they came to the place that they are right now. And that narration is neither right nor wrong. It simply is what it is. Now, that may sound very relativistic to you, and it may feel like you need to have more clearly defined principles that guide the way you hear stories. But I encourage you to try it in your own life, to just listen to a story told by someone about how they came to see the world as they see it now. What was it that was shaping to them? What trauma and tragedy and pain have they endured that brought them to that place? What advantages or disadvantages have shaped that story? And how do you receive that story? Can you receive it with just an open heart, open ears, and just receive the story for what it is, perhaps asking some clarifying questions without judging the story itself? You know, when you tell a story, it is very disarming. When I read stories, biblical stories, stories from other sacred writers, I often find myself taken aback when it's not a pronouncement, but simply a story. Oftentimes in the answer to questions. The founder of Christianity, I'm not sure he intended to found an entire religion. You can have that argument whatever way you want to, but the thing that he often did in response to questions that were asked him were to tell stories. Stories like the story of a prodigal son. What does it look like when you've lost something and you're trying to find your footing again? And so the story of the prodigal son is a story that is of someone who squandered, left home and squandered his life, some would say, and then expected that there would be no place for him, when instead great grace received him with a very loving, in a very loving and powerful way. And that kind of response, giving us a story to tell rather than telling us this is the answer, gives us room to begin to interpret where we are in the story. Am I the loving father in that story? Is God the loving father in that story? Am I the prodigal son? We often see ourselves as that prodigal child wandering away. But can we see ourselves also in the elder brother who judges the receipt of the prodigal son back into the family? I see myself in all those places, times when I've opened my arms wide and embraced those who felt their lives had been wasted. And they found in themselves something beautiful that perhaps they might have missed. I've also been the one that wandered away and squandered what I had, perhaps chasing after things that didn't really matter, and had to come back to the simple realization that I simply was infinitely precious and unconditionally loved for the gift I am. And sometimes I've been the judgmental older brother that says, who do they think they are? Who do they think they are coming back after squandering whatever their inheritance might be? There are so many ways to see and receive a story. So I want you to spend some time. I want to invite you, in the same way I am in my own life, to begin to look at the stories. Remember that time? You might begin. Remember that time um, I was better than I thought I could be. Remember that time when I failed, but I learned from my failure and got back up and tried again. Remember when that mistake I made alienated people that really mattered to me. Is there anything I can do about to add to that narrative now? Is there something I can change, or is it simply too late? I encourage you to look at the stories that you're curating in your own life and that are being curated around you. Listen for the echoes of things that really, really ring true in you, and the things that no longer really describe who you are. Tell yourself some of those stories from your childhood that you remember, and maybe look at it with a different kind of eye. Perhaps write down the stories. Look at it with a fresh eye, because you always told it, this is where, I blew it, or this is, and you're still carrying that now. If you can look with a new eye at some of those stories in your life, maybe re-narrate them in new ways, you might discover more about what a gift you are. Because indeed, you are infinitely precious and unconditionally loved for the gift you already are. Don't forget the beautiful stories that have made your life. Some of them are painful. Some of them you're still learning from, but those stories are your gift. The way you see them, the way you narrate them and tell the world. Same is true of the sacred stories that have come your way and the stories of others. Can you care for yourself and others with that kind of gentle reverence that stories deserve? Until the next time, I wish you all the best. Hope you're having a good day.